Welcome to the Grab Bag. Tonight we have a special presentation with Adam Miller, a very unique musician and storyteller. Sit back, relax, enjoy the next hour. Welcome to KXCR 90.7 on your FM dial. I'm sitting here with Adam Miller, folk singer, storyteller, and auto harp virtuoso. Hi, Adam.
Hi, thanks for inviting me down, Will.
You're welcome. When did you begin collecting old songs, Adam?
I got into this as a small kid. I was known in Pacific Grove, California, where I grew up, as sort of the fanatic kid who went to all the garage sales and antique stores looking for old 78s and approaching older neighbors and asking them what sort of songs they sang when they were young. I had an audiographic memory and remembered pretty much everything I ever heard. And as a kid, I figured that that was everybody's experience. It wasn't until I became an adult that I realized that that was a rather unique way to experience life.
Is that also how you became interested in folk songs?
Yeah, I was fortunate to grow up in the 1960s when folk music was having a revival and it was actually on the radio. And in my youth, I got to see a lot of really great and inspiring folk singers. And when I was about 11 years old, we drove down the Pacific Coast Highway to the Big Sur Grange Hall in 1971 on a Saturday night in September to see a folk singer by the name of Sam Hinton, who made a very big impression on me, as you can see what I'm doing for work 45 years later.
Okay, before I ask you the next question, I want you to pick up that instrument.
Okay.
And give it just a couple strums so people can hear it. And they'll know what it sounds like when you
Well, this is an auto harp, and you just don't see them that much anymore. When I was a kid, all the school teachers had them. In my generation, they become rather obscure.
Beautiful.
But there was a time when this was one of the best-selling instruments in America, back before radio and television and recorded music, when weird instruments were about as popular as cell phone apps are today.
When did you discover this?
I got turned on to the auto harp. It was in the early 1990s. I was living alone in a cabin on top of a mountain, and somebody loaned me an auto harp for that 2-week Christmas break, and I think I held that thing 16 hours a day, and just, it was true love. And after maybe 3 or 4 more weeks, I ordered the very harp you hear me playing now, and started on my journey as an auto harp player.
I love the sound of this instrument.
Can I play a tune on the auto harp?
You bet. Go for it.
I'll play one that everybody knows, Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
As you can see, Adam, I've got a smile on my face. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Are you also a songwriter?
Not really. I live in a time when it's all about singers and songwriters, and I send my CD into a festival, and they write back and say, how can you be a folk singer? You didn't write any of these songs. But what I do find myself doing is repairing a lot of songs, songs that verses that have become antiquated that need to be updated, or sometimes you get an old ballad where there's a missing verse and you have to fill it in. But one of the things that's allowed me to be such a good song collector is that all my energy was not spent writing songs, as most of my contemporaries are doing in this generation.
Where do you tour, Adam? When you go out, do you tour around the country or just locally? What do you do for touring?
I work a circuit from Barrow, Alaska to the Everglades. And this year I've been as far as Wells, Maine, as far south as Miami, all the way down to work in Los Angeles, and all the way up to work in Seattle. And I've been in probably 28 states in between this year.
So if you're in Florida performing, would you perform different songs than you would if you were in Alaska?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things with my large repertoire, one of the things I like to do is to be sensitive of what's going on in the time or place where I'm going. I don't live very far away from this town, but coming out to the coast, I would quickly gravitate to singing songs about canneries and fishermen and sailors and life on the shore. Whereas if you do a cannery song, I was just in Anaconda, Montana on Thursday night, and if you do a cannery song for those people who are 1,000 miles from the ocean, it doesn't have the same response, as if you do it on a shore where someone has a relative who used to work in the cannery that wasn't even far from this town. So wherever I go, I'm trying to tune into what happened historically, what's going on, what do people do. When I was up, I played in Helena, Montana, and saw so many wheat fields. I dug out all my wheat farmer songs, harvest songs. Wherever you go, you try to do things for what is going on locally and what the local people can relate to.
Would you be willing to play a cannery song now?
Sure.
That you would play in Alaska?
Sure.
I'd love to hear one. And then when you're done this one, I'll ask you for a song from either Montana or Florida that you would play there.
I want to tell you, cannery songs are a real specialty for me because I grew up in a house at the corner of First and Central in Pacific Grove, California, which is now 2 blocks away from the Monterey Aquarium, which is an enormous tourist destination. And as a kid, Cannery Row was abandoned. Nothing like you read in the Steinbeck books. It was all a bunch of empty buildings with broken windows. There was one cannery left that still canned squid for the people in Japan. And I tried to collect cannery songs, but the old women said to me, we sang songs from our home countries, Italy or Portugal, because we were homesick. The motherlode of cannery songs for me were found when I got up here to the Pacific Northwest. On the lower Columbia, between Astoria and, say, Portland, there were 55 salmon canneries in the 1880s. 55 salmon canneries. So there was a lot of cannery songs. And this one I'm going to sing for you was written by a woman by the name of Linda Chobatuk, who lives in British Columbia. And she wrote this song about the cannery on the Fraser River where all of her girlfriends worked in the 70s making their money for college. It's called Canning Salmon, and it's on my new CD called It Might As Well Be a Myth. Guys on the dock laze around, race the forklift, and sass the floor lady till it's time for their tea. Then they sit at the table by the window that opens and get paid $1 more an hour than me. High is the smell, low is the pay. Long are the hours, why do we stay? Somewhere outside a whole summer slips away, and we're stuck in here canning salmon. The machinery's so loud that they say we've gone can deaf, and our shift is long over before we can hear. But they keep the noise level right under the limit, so they won't have to buy us the right safety gear. High is the smell, low is the pay. Long are the hours, why do we stay? Somewhere outside a whole summer slips away, and we're stuck in here canning salmon. First we can spring so heavy our arms ache, and next we do sockeyes, which are easy to can. Then we do springs all mashed up and rotten, so they're packed up in pound tins and shipped to Japan. High is the smell, low is the pay, long are the hours, why do we stay? Somewhere outside a whole summer slips away, and we're stuck in here canning salmon. Last night we were waiting for a boat to come in, so they kept us on line, just standing around. So we didn't know that outside on the river a boat had tipped over and 2 men had drowned. High is the smell, low is the pay, long are the hours, why do we stay? Somewhere outside a whole summer slips away, and we're stuck in here canning salmon.
Adam, this is beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I love that song.
Wow. I could listen to you all day. Don't put that guitar away unless you're going to pick up the auto harp for your next song. I want you to pick one of your favorite songs that you would play around the country other than Alaska. And please pick a song that you won't be performing August 30th at the library.
Okay, I'll sing you one here. Each year they invite me out to Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin to do a program of folk songs of the Great Lakes. And it's one of these evergreen programs that I can sell every year. What you discover as a performer, if you want to work 200 days a year, people have already seen Adam Miller. They had you last year. So you go back and you sell them a different program. It's the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. Let's have a program about trains. Or it's 100 years since World War I ended. Let's have folk songs of World War I. So I do my program of folk songs of the Great Lakes, and I was just out there in June playing on the Upper Peninsula up near the Canadian border, and I was reminding people that even in my lifetime, I can remember before we had an EPA, when there was no Environmental Protection Agency, and Lake Erie was so polluted you couldn't eat the fish that came out of it. And the only way that the fishermen could survive is they'd have to sell those fish to Japan, where they had a voracious appetite for almost any kind of fish and different health standards. And now that the EPA is being run a little differently than it used to be, I remind people up there that, their lakes may be polluted again. So Stan Rogers, who's been dead since 1983, wrote this song back in the late 70s, probably 40 years ago. He went up to Port Dover on the north shore of Lake Erie, and he saw how the fishing industry was pretty well decimated because of the horrible pollution in the Great Lakes. So he wrote this song about those fishermen who couldn't sell their fish anywhere except to pack them up and sell the tiny fish to Japan. And this one's on my Orphan Train CD. Where Patterson Creek's muddy waters run down past the Penny Arcade by the harbor downtown, all the old turtlebacks rust in the rain like they never will leave there again. But leave there they will in the hour before dawn, slip out in the night wind without word or song. For a few more years yet, we will work while we can to catch tiny fish for Japan. No whitefish or trout here, we leave them alone. The inspectors raise hell if we take any home. What kind of fisherman can't eat his catch or call what he's taken his own? Well, the plant works 3 shifts now. There's plenty of pay. We ship 17 tons of this garbage each day. And if you want to eat fish, well, go open a can and catch tiny fish for Japan. In the Norfolk Hotel, over far too much beer, the old guys remember when the water ran clear. No poisons with names that we can't understand, and no tiny fish for Japan. Well, the days run together, each one is the same, and it's good that the smelt has no lovelier name, for it's all just a job now. We'll work while we can to catch tiny fish for Japan. And we'll catch tiny fish for Japan.
That was exquisite. Thank you.
It's a lovely song.
Wow.
You know, I made that on an album 14 years ago. I made an album called The Orphan Train and Other Reminiscences, and I recorded a bunch of folk songs that could never, ever happen again in history. And that was one of them. It never occurred to me that anything could change and the Great Lakes would become polluted again. So it's interesting how, if you live long enough, some of these old songs become relevant again. So I find myself singing this 40-year-old song once again, reminding people, you know, there was a time when we didn't have an EPA and you could turn on the television and see the Cuyahoga River on fire, and turn on the television and see the fishermen who couldn't fish the Great Lakes.
Folks like you are priceless, Adam. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be invited. You know, there are so few of these real community radio stations left. Where I grew up in Pacific Grove in 1977, KAZU-FM signed on the air. And since I was already had a great reputation for being that crazy kid who collected songs and records, they got me a radio show. And it was sort of the beginning of this whole career, learning to speak in complete sentences, learning to play music for people and talk about the songs. So when I travel, you know, I'm flipping the radio dial in my rent-a-car. I'm on the road 70,000 miles a year. And all I hear is Fox and Rush Limbaugh, and in a few states you hear a little bit of NPR. And then every now and then you hear a station like this, where a local programmer is telling a local story in a local regional accent and playing recordings from the station's collection or from their own collection. It's a real relief when you're in the car all day. I'm so glad this station's here and you folks are doing what you're doing.
I am too. And I'll tell you what, Adam, I've already told you this before we were on the air. This station is going to provide you a copy of this show. And whenever you visit another or want to have another community radio station share this recording, you're free to do so. And I'll provide that to you probably tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very happy I'm really happy you made it up here. Adam drove 70 miles for this interview, and I'm thankful he did. I hope you guys are too. I'm going to change the subject a little bit. I've read that you've performed for over 1.5 million students. Why do you do so many concerts for young people?
Well, I told you the story a few minutes ago how when I was a kid, being taken to a single concert, a single Folksingers concert, really changed my life. I didn't know this when I was 12 years old, but now in my late 50s, looking back, I can see how influenced I was by that single experience. And in my childhood, I was taken to many, many acoustic concerts. So I think it's a big deal for kids to be exposed. I've been on probably 5,000 or 6,000 school campuses from Alaska to Florida. And one of the ways you can make a living as a 21st century troubadour is getting up early in the morning where nobody else, even the community radio stations, wants you on the air, and going and doing concerts for children at 8 or 9 in the morning. It pays well. It's a compulsory audience. They ask you to sing songs and talk about stuff that relates to what they're studying in school. So you need to have some knowledge of what children in Oregon study that's different from what children in Washington study. And you have to have different programs for different ages, because what's going to be entertaining for grades 1 through 3 will not hold the attention of high school kids. And it's honest work, and children won't shine you on at all if they don't find you interesting. They will converse or turn their back, so it's wonderful training as a performer. And I love working with kids. There aren't nearly as many school assemblies as there used to be. Too many school shootings, too many strikes, that sort of thing getting in the way. But it was one of my favorite things in the work I've done, and it's really made me a much better performer having worked with all those young people. That's why I do the summer reading program. In fact, that's what I'm going to go do the kids program at the library in Cottage Grove at 2:30 on Wednesday, the 22nd. And I played for many of the libraries in Douglas County, and I just got done doing kids shows in Helena. I'm just delighted to work with children. They're a great audience, and there are all these songs that you don't get to sing with grown-ups that children love.
You're a consummate professional. You adapt your music to the audience you're playing for, and performing across America and different age groups. That cannot be an easy thing to do. I really tip my hat to you.
Oh, I just love it. It's wonderful.
Let me ask you, would you be willing to play a children's song?
Yeah, actually, what I'll do is I'll play you a kid's song. I'll play you the oldest English language folk song ever published in a book.
You're on.
Now, we had a printing press in China 1,000 years ago, but it's 10,000 miles from China to London. It took a long time for that printing press to get to Germany. We didn't get the Gutenberg Bible till 1456, and they didn't have a printing press in England till 500 years ago. So this song was printed in a book from a printing press in the year 1549. And the song is so widespread today, there are 200 ways to sing it in the English language.
Oh,
and it's a picture book in every library I've ever visited. Even the littlest libraries have one of these picture books, and the big ones, like the one I play in Orlando on Central Boulevard, they got a children's library you could land a 747 in. And they have 4 different picture books that tell the same story by different authors and illustrators at different times in the 20th century. And since this is a mature audience that is listening in to this radio program, I guess it's okay to tell them that this is a song about dating somebody from another species. Well, it's true. Froggy Went A-Courtin' is the oldest English language folk song printed in a book. A little frog falls in love with a little mouse and wants to live happily ever after. What do you think their kids would look like? Tadpoles covered with fur? So there are a bunch of great versions of this, but I'll sing you the one I put on my best-selling kids CD. The CD is called Along Came a Giant, and I learned this one from my mentor, Sam Hinton. He told me he was sitting in his mother's kitchen on Zuna Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the early 1930s, listened to a radio show broadcast from San Francisco called The Carnival Cavalcade. And a man on that radio show way back during the Depression, the early 1930s, he sang this version. His name was Charlie Marshall, and he called himself the Old Maverick. And that's all I know about him. But it's my favorite version of Froggy Went A-Courtin', the oldest English language folk song printed in a book, the one about the little frog who wants to marry the little mouse and live happily ever after. Froggy went a-courtin' and he did ride, a-rinkum-buddy Michicambo, sword and a pistol by his side, a-rinkum-buddy Michicambo, Kimo-camo, Dominic-a-ramo, Kimo-camo, Nero, straddle-addle-addle-bubble-addle-bubble-inkum, rinkum-buddy Michicambo. Folk can join in at home whenever they're ready. He rode up to Miss Mousie's door, rinkum-buddy Michicambo, loud did knock and loud did roar, rinkum-buddy Michicambo, Kimo-camo, Dominic-a-ramo, Kimo-camo, Nero, straddle-addle-addle-bubble-addle-bubble-inkum, rinkum-buddy Michicambo. You know what she said? She said, without my Uncle Rat's consent, rinkum-buddy Michicambo, why I couldn't even marry the president. Rinkum-buddy Michicambo, Kimo-camo, Dominic-a-ramo, Kimo-camo, Nero, straddle-addle-addle-bubble-addle-bubble-inkum, rinkum-buddy Michicambo. Well, Uncle Ratty soon came home, rinkum-buddy Michicambo, and he said, who's been here while I was gone? Rinkum-buddy Michicambo, Kimo-camo, Dominic-a-ramo, Kimo-camo, Nero, straddle-addle-addle-bubble-addle-bubble-inkum, rinkum-buddy Michicambo. Well, Uncle Ratty laughed and shook his fat sides. Rinkum-buddy Michicambo, to think of Miss Mousie being a bride. Rinkum-buddy Michicambo, Kimo-camo, Dominic-a-ramo, Kimo-camo, Nero, straddle-addle-addle-bubble-addle-bubble-inkum, rinkum-buddy Michicambo. So Uncle Rat rode into town, rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo, to buy Miss Mousie's wedding gown. Rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo, chemo camo, Dominic Ramo, chemo camo Nero, straddle a bubble income, rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo. Where will the wedding supper be? Rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo, way down south in a hollow tree. Rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo, chemo camo, Dominic Ramo, chemo camo Nero, straddle a bubble income, rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo. There's bread and cheese upon the shelf. Rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo, if you want any more, you can sing it yourself. Rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo, chemo camo, Dominic Ramo, chemo camo Nero, straddle a bubble income, rinkum buddy Mitchy Cambo. So that really is the oldest English language folk song ever printed in a book. And someday they may find an old book in English that has an older one. But for the last few hundred years, Froggy Went A-Courtin' has held that title.
Well, you can see me. The audience can't. I've got a big old grin on my face. My knees been going up and down, and I've had a heart smile, a heart laugh going the whole time. I can see why children would like that song.
They do. And you know what's funny is that if you leave the CD with the music teacher, you come back a year later, and even the preschoolers know it. But high school kids, which is probably the most challenging audience to work with, if you challenge the high school audience that they can't sing that, by the third chorus they have it down because they like to be challenged. So it's always funny to see how that plays. And there are a whole lot of other versions of Froggy Went A-Courtin' that I like to sing, but I think that one has the biggest effect on people. There's something about that wonderful nonsense chorus.
Okay, so thank you. That's the oldest children's song. And my next question for you, you may have already answered it. Are old songs relevant to the 21st century audiences? My question, that's the question, but also what is the oldest song you know? Did you just play it?
Well, that's the oldest one ever that's the oldest English language folk song printed in a book. There are older songs that we still sing today. London Bridge is Falling Down is probably about 500 years old. Three Blind Mice hasn't changed since it was printed in the 1650s. You know, the one about I gave my love a cherry that had no stone, I gave my love a chicken that had no bone. That one hasn't changed in about 600 years. So what's really interesting is how the songs don't change. Certain songs we can trace back through the centuries and see how one song spawns from another. What's really weird is when a song stays stagnant for about 500 years, like I Gave My Love a Cherry, the Cherry song. Mostly they change, but there's still some very old songs that we sing today that we're not really conscious of their antiquity. I'll give you an example. The most widespread English language folk song of them all, by a factor of 3. I told you there are 200 versions of Froggy Went A-Courtin'. There are 600 versions of the one about Barbara Allen, and 200 melodies. Now, Barbara Allen may be one that isn't familiar to listeners who hear me speaking now, but Barbara Allen was one of those girls, or boys, we all went to high school with somebody like that, where the boys would say, well, Barbara Allen, if you won't marry me, I'm just going to die. And she'd say, well, that's fine, son. Suit yourself. Kind of a hard-hearted girl. I think that the common experience of being in love with someone who doesn't love you back is the reason Barbara Allen is so widespread. 600 versions? I don't know of any other song in English of which we have more than 200 versions. And you might surmise that if Froggy Went A-Courtin' is 475 years old and there are 200 versions, does that make Barbara Allen 1,000 years old if there are 600 versions? We have no way of knowing because these songs are older than the printing press. But I will tell you something we know for certain. We know for certain that Samuel Pepys, who anticipated Facebook by some 350 years, do you have friends who take pictures of their lunch and post them on Facebooks? Well, Mr. Pepys, who lived in England 350 years ago, he would write 2 pages in his diary about what he had for lunch, anticipating this selfie concept. And he tells us in his diary in the middle 1600s that he heard that song Barbara Allen sung at a New Year's party. So we know for certain it's 350 years old. And I imagine I'm not going to get out of this conversation without playing Barbara Allen, am I?
I was going to ask you, would you like to play Barbara Allen for us?
Now remember, there are 600 ways to sing Barbara Allen, but I'm going to sing you my favorite version because while it is simultaneously an Elizabethan folk song, it's also a cowboy ballad. See, a lot of the work that I do is made easy by the people who came before me, and the late, great Art Thiem, who came from Peru, Illinois, and died just a few summers ago. Art collected all these songs. And I was just a toddler when Art Thiem hitchhiked from Illinois out to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and went across the street from the train station into the little low-dive saloon there on West 15th. And he met a cowboy at the bar named Del Bray. And first they shared beers, and then they shared songs. And Del Bray had a Wyoming cowboy version of this most widespread English-language ballad, the song about Barbara Allen. And I put it on the new CD, which is called The Radio's Taken Our Songs Away, the irrepressible American folk song in the age of the selfie. This is that version of Barbara Allen that Art Thiem collected from Del Bray 50 years ago, and they just call it Cowboy Barbara Allen. Near Medicine Bow, where I was born, there was a fair maid dwellin'. She made all the lads ride saddle sore, and her name was Barbara Allen. Her name was Barbara Allen. 'Twas in the merry month of May, the green buds they were bloomin'. Young William came to the western range, come a-courtin' Barbara Allen, come a-courtin' Barbara Allen. 'Twas in the merry month of June, the green buds they were swellin'. Young William on his deathbed lay, just for lovin' Barbara Allen, just for lovin' Barbara Allen. So we sent a message out to her, to the place where she was dug in, sayin', come and see young Bill today. We think that he's a-dyin', we believe that he's a-dyin'. So slowly, slowly she went down, and slowly she went to him. And when she pulled the blankets back, she said, Bill, I think you're dyin'. Yep, Bill, I think you're dyin'. Oh, I am sick, I'm very sick. I never shall get better until I get the love of you. The love of Barbara Allen, the love of Barbara Allen. Now she went walking through the brush. We heard the cattle moaning, and with every moan they seemed to say, hard-hearted Barbara Allen, hard-hearted Barbara Allen. And she said, Father, Father, go dig my grave, dig it deep and narrow. Young William died for me today. I'm gonna die for him tomorrow. I'll die for him tomorrow. So we laid her down in the old churchyard, and Bill's grave, it was nigh her. And from his grave grew a red, red rose, and from hers grew a briar. Yes, from hers grew a briar. And they tangled round the marker rocks till they could grow no higher, and there they formed a true lover's knot. The rose round the thorny briar, the rose round the thorny briar. Near Medicine Bow, where I was born, there was a fair maid dwellin'. She made all the lads ride saddle sore, and her name was Barbara Allen. Her name was Barbara Allen.
I almost want to clap every time you stop a song. I could listen to your voice. Every song you've done, I'm just sitting here with a smile on my face. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
I've read that you have a repertoire of over 5,000 songs, and you go around the country playing pertinent to the area that you're performing in. Is it difficult to pick out songs for different areas? And while you answer that, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I would like you to play us another song that you would play if you were to show up in New Orleans. So, is it difficult to pick out of the 5,000 songs, particular songs for every area?
What's difficult is doing things on the dime. That the way memory works, memory is sort of a psychic landfill. And like the ocean, everything's in there, but you don't get it till it comes to the surface, and then you write it down on a piece of paper. Otherwise, it disappears back into those black depths, and it's gone till the next time it surfaces. So when I know I'm going to play in New Orleans, I have weeks to remember, oh, this was written by a guy in New Orleans, or here's the Lakes Pontchartrain, or here's one that James Booker used to play, or here's one that Louis Armstrong sung when he was little. And so what's often embarrassing is I played a gig in Galax, Virginia, in February. And in Galax, Virginia, they have a fiddle festival. They get 50,000 people at the festival. And there was a man there in my audience who was famous for playing the fiddle tunes of the great Henry Reed, who was a guy from Virginia who died back in the 60s but was recorded for Library of Congress. And it wasn't until I got back in the car and drove away that I realized there's a Henry Reed tune on my new CD, and I should have played it for him. So the challenge of the psychic landfill, that when you know you're going to be playing in New Orleans and you have enough time to think of it, but often when you're put on the dime, the brain just freezes up like a deer in headlights, which is why the folks at home can't see that I brought a few pieces of paper here to help cue my memory. It's easy to remember all the words and all the songs. What's hard to remember is which song to grab. You show up in a town and they say, oh, today we're celebrating the bakery's 100 years old. And you say, oh, geez, I wish I could come up with a 1918 bakery song. And then as soon as you get in the car and drive to the Motel 6, you think of 3 of them. So I'm sitting here thinking, what would I play if I were in New Orleans? What would I play for them? And I honestly don't know at this moment. I would simply punt and sing something from the South. But the program that I'm doing at your local library at noon on Thursday, August 30th, is a program of folk songs from the American labor movement. And in the interest of full disclosure, my father was a labor lawyer, back in the days when labor lawyers were always on the side of the unions and the working men. Today, in the 21st century, if you're a labor lawyer, that means you sit at the table with the corporation and see if you can beat the union and the working men. My grandparents lived in America during the Depression. My father's father was a union carpenter. He wasn't even a citizen, but he was a union carpenter. My mother's father was a union painter who became an official in the union later in his life in Los Angeles as the executive secretary of the Painters Union. So I grew up in one of those families where the only sin was crossing a picket line. And we weren't allowed to eat table grapes from Safeway for 20 years in solidarity with the farm workers. So for that program, I know exactly what I'm going to sing. And there's songs, some of which I've known all my life, songs and stories that I've honed, because every year in September, libraries and churches all over America want this show about the folk songs of the American labor movement. So you kind of have, you know what 20 songs you're going to use in that program. And once you get it down, you don't change it. And what you're always looking for is new programs. I just played up at the library in Seaside in January, and the librarian there said, well, do a program of, old songs about the Oregon Trail and people coming to the West. It's always wonderful when people, about 15 years ago, they called me from the museum in Fargo, North Dakota, the Airplane Museum. She said, I know you have a large repertoire. Could you do an hour program of pilot songs from World War II? And I was like, this is what I live for. Give me a month to pull them all out of that psychic landfill that we call memory, and I'll have a whole program of World War II pilot songs for you.
Well, have you come up with one for New Orleans yet, or would you like to play any other song you'd like for this audience now in Oregon?
What I thought I would do is I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Okay.
I would play a song that I'm going to use in the program at your library on Thursday, August 30th at noon. I always include this song in my program of folk songs of the American labor movement. And my mentor, Sam Hinton, reminded me that if you're ever with high school kids and you can't get them to sing along because they're being cool, you sing this song, and they forget about being cool, and they all sing this song, and when you come back a year or 5 years later, the teachers will say, oh, they're still singing that damn song you taught them. So this song was written by a man named Maurice Sugar. Maurice Sugar was a conscientious objector during the First World War, which means he sat in prison for several years, not because he had religious beliefs, but he thought that killing people was sinful. Very interesting way of looking at the world, you must admit. Maurice Sugar got into the labor movement, and he became the attorney for the United Auto Workers in Michigan. So this song was written for the famous sit-down strike in February of 1937. People forget that for decades the strikes had consisted of people standing in front of the business holding signs, which made them very easy to arrest, which left the machines wide open for the non-union laborers, the scabs, to come in and take their posts. So the sit-down strike was a very creative idea. The first idea was that the men would never leave their posts. They would hold on to their machines. So if anybody came to displace them as a scab or a non-union worker, they wouldn't be able to get to that seat. And here's how they did it. On February 1st, they sent a whole bunch, a couple hundred guys over to Plant Number 9 in Flint. And that brought the cops and that brought the union men, and everybody thought the action was at Plant Number 9, but that was just a diversion. The real idea was to seize Plant Number 4, and they sent 100 men over there because Plant Number 4 was the only building on Earth where engines were made for Chevrolet automobiles. So when they took over Plant Number 4 and did the sit-down strike, they shut down General Motors. And you might think it would have taken longer, but for a few days the wives brought sandwiches and thermoses of coffee and cartons of cigarette and brought them through the window. It only took 11 days to bring General Motors to its knees. And on February 11th of 1937, they signed a contract to allow the United Auto Workers to collectively bargain for their union members. And it's one of the biggest breakthroughs in the history of unions. And this is the song Maurice Sugar wrote for that strike. Now, all these union songs, kind of like the civil rights movement songs, they had to have easy choruses that everybody knew and tunes that people were familiar with. So he took that old song from the British Music Hall, My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, and he made a song, because you have to remember in 1937 there were thousands of people online in Chicago and New York and Boston just waiting for a free loaf of bread or a bowl of soup. And that's why Maurice Sugar wrote the Soup Song. I'm spending the night in a flop house. I'm spending my days on the street. I'm looking for work, but I find none. I wish I had something to eat. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Now I went off to fight for my country. I went off to bleed and to die. I came home and I asked them to help me, and this was my country's reply. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Now I saved $20 with my banker to buy me a car and a yacht. I went down to withdraw all my money, and this was the answer I got. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. When I die and I go up to heaven, St. Peter will let me right in. He could tell by the soup that they fed me that I was unable to sin. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Maurice Sugar. You can see that that one is irresistible to the high school students. They forget all about being cool, and they start singing soup, soup, and they go back to class singing soup, soup. The teachers say it goes on for a year.
I hope the folks that are coming to your August 30th show at the library bring their teenagers. I really do.
Well, some of them may be in school, but what I really hope is that we get enough folks there to sing along, because it's when I do these programs of folk songs from the American labor movement or folk songs of the civil rights movement, it's not enough to put these songs in people's ears. You have to be able to put them in their mouths. They have to experience the song as groups singing, or they just don't get it. If a song from the civil rights movement helped make your fear go away, unless you get a big group of people singing it, they don't experience the disappearing of that fear. If these songs about the American labor movement help promote solidarity and organization and help deal with people's fears when they're on the picket line, until you sing them, you don't experience those sensations. So it isn't sufficient to just sit there politely and listen. These are songs that must be sung by groups of people. That's what they were for.
So you're going to be doing that at the library involving
Absolutely.
People. What time is the show? What time?
I believe it's at 12 noon on Thursday, August 30th.
I think that's right, 12 noon. Be there, folks. This guy is talented. He's sitting here playing any song I ask him to do off the top of his head. He has no music. He has no sheet music. He has no word lists. He's doing it from his heart. This is a talented man. Now I'm gonna change the subject. You're a storyteller also. What kind of stories do you tell, Adam?
Well, a lot of my stories are about the provenance and the history and the time and the place of the song. Art reflects the time, and unless you understand the time that the art comes from, it's difficult to appreciate the song. There have been a lot of opportunities this year where I've sung a song that was sung in Germany 200 years ago called Thoughts Are Free. No scholar can map them, no hunter can trap them, no man can deny, Die Gedanken sind frei, that thoughts are free. And I always point out to the audience that this is one of the songs that Hitler banned. So it's really important that we sing it right now, at this time of fascism in the government and Nazis marching in some of our cities, to bring these songs out of mothballs and to sing them. So some of my stories are just for entertainment. Some of them are I have a 30-minute, one of my most requested program is a program I do about the life and songs of Woody Guthrie. And I have a 30-minute story that I tell about how Woody came to write the song, This Land Is Your Land. Because most people just dismiss it as a silly children's song like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or Old MacDonald Had a Farm. But people forget that Woody Guthrie wrote this song in response to God Bless America, written by a millionaire named Irving Berlin, who owned the Music Box Theater on Broadway, who rode around in a chauffeured limousine, who wasn't part of those thousands of mothers and fathers waiting online for the free bowl of soup or the loaf of bread as Woody Guthrie was. And he wanted to know how a millionaire during a depression could be so insensitive to write a song called God Bless America when everybody who was religious was praying that they just had a little bit more food for their kids or a job so they wouldn't have to wait online for a free loaf of bread. It makes it a very different song. People forget that Woody wrote, In the shadow of the steeple I saw my people. By the relief office I saw my people. As I stood there hungry, I stood there wondering if God blessed America for me. That's very different than what we sing with the kids at school. So it takes me 30 minutes to give the audience the whole provenance and the whole setting so they can really understand what was Woody thinking in the last week of February of 1940 on the second floor of Hanover House at the corner of 43rd Street and 6th Avenue in New York City, where he sat at that little desk with that yellow pencil and that sheet of lined notebook paper and wrote that song that we all take for granted today. So that's what some of my stories do.
You've got to play Woody's song for us, Adam. Come on. Can you?
It's a 30-minute story. Perhaps I could do that on another visit.
But could you play This Land Is...
Oh, that I could easily do.
I would love
that.
That
Doesn't hurt at all.
Thank you. I think that's fabulous. Thank you.
So I think it's important for people to understand that just like Joe Hill, who wrote those songs for the Union movement 100 years ago, who I'll be talking about at the program on the 30th, will also sing some of the songs that Woody Guthrie wrote. Because Woody Guthrie, in a short dozen years, wrote over 1,000 American folk songs, and he didn't use an original melody for any one of those songs. Every one of them was like Jingle Bells, Batman Smells. He took songs he already knew, and he threw away the words, and he made up new words to old songs. And many of those songs came off the 78 RPM records of Woody's favorite band, the Carter Family. Many people forget that in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1928, at a session for Ralph Peer, the original Carter Family recorded a little hymn, and it went like this. Oh, my darling brother, when the world's on fire, do you want God's bosom to be your pillow? Won't you tide me over in the rock of ages? Oh, rock of ages, cleft for me. Most people don't sing that anymore, do they? We sing Woody's words to that tune, and that's the testament to Woody's achievement, that the new words are what we sing to those old tunes. So Woody had left California, bound for New York City, back in the days before the highway system, and he had a letter in his pocket from his buddy Will Geer. Remember Will Geer? He played Grandpa Walton on the Waltons. Well, when Will wrote this letter, he was starring as Jeter Lester in a Broadway play called Tobacco Road, and living pretty well. He wrote to Woody and said, if you can't get any work in California, come to New York City and we'll get you some work here. So Woody did just that. Without a suitcase or a jacket or a guitar, he started heading east, and every time he stopped for a cup of coffee, he heard a song on the radio, the one Irving Berlin wrote, that went, God bless America, land that I love, stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. Well, Woody hated this song. He hated this song because he was broke in hitchhiking and Irving Berlin was a millionaire, and he thought we needed another song about this country. So when he got to New York City, he stayed with the Geers and borrowed Will's wife's pre-World War II Brazilian Rosewood Martin guitar, and he walked 18 blocks across Manhattan to the corner of 43rd Street and 6th Avenue. And Woody checked himself in the last week of February to a little hotel called Hanover House that doesn't exist anymore. And with a yellow pencil and a piece of that notebook paper, he made up his song about the United States. Well, I played for 1.5 million kids, and I never had to teach them this song because somebody already taught it to them on their campus. But they don't know the whole story because they sing a verse that goes like this. As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. What the kids don't know is that Woody was going to call this song God Blessed America for Me to point his finger right at Irving Berlin, till he tried the words, this land is your land, and found how they trip right off your tongue, and they're so inclusive. And I don't think this song would have resonated the way it did. You know, this was never in the top 40, and never on the hit parade. And yet today it's one of the 4 best-known English-language folk songs in the whole wide world. Which means whatever country your ancestors came from, whatever language they spoke at home, if they know one song in English that isn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Old MacDonald, or Happy Birthday to You, they know the one that Woody wrote. And when Woody wrote this song, it was a fairly grown-up song, because the first verse he wrote was for Irving Berlin. In the shadow of the steeple, I saw my people by the welfare office. I saw my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there wondering if God blessed America for me. Now, he wasn't being sacrilegious. Woody came from a church-going family in Okemah, Oklahoma. He just wanted to know how a millionaire could be so insensitive. So Woody wrote another verse at Hanover House, and I think he wrote this one with high school students in mind. Gives you a little insight into his philosophy, and it went like this. There was a great big wall there that tried to stop me, and a great big sign there said private property, but on the other side, you know, it didn't say nothing. Well, that side was made for you and me. Now, I was spoon-fed Pete Seeger from the time I was 1 year old, and he made a very big impression on me. And Pete used to say that of the verses Woody wrote at Hanover House, that this next one was the most important. And I believe Pete, and whenever I have children, no matter what age, I always sing the verse for them that goes like this. Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking Down freedom's highway, nobody living can make me turn back, 'cause this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I love the storytelling of it all.
It's a pretty important song because you only get one in a century. In the 19th century, we had Stephen Foster. In the 20th century, we had Woody Guthrie. And it's unlikely you and I are going to be around long enough to perceive which of the 21st century songs, without being a commercial hit, is so resonant that everyone on the continent learns it and teaches it to their kids organically and naturally. You know, a song like God Bless America was an enormous hit for Kate Smith. And Irving Berlin was a millionaire. And lots of people recorded it. And that's how that one gets so widespread. But none of that is true for This Land Is Your Land. Oh yeah, Pete Seeger made a real strong effort in his time to make sure that everyone sang along with him. And he did a lot to propagate the song. But songs like that have legs on their own.
I think you've just answered my next question. How does a song become a folk song?
Well, it wasn't that long ago when only kings and queens were rich enough to have other people play music for them, and regular folks like you and me had to make our own music. Now a folk song is a folk song that's passed on from one person's mouth to another person's ear in an oral tradition. So all that commercial folk music, the Kingston Trio, Bob Dylan, Peter, Paul, and Mary, some of the songs they sang were folk songs, and some of the songs they sang will become folk songs, but that has to operate independently from one generation to the next, from one person's mouth to another person's ear, to truly be a song of the folk, because we're the folk, the regular folks, just like you and I.
We're about out of time. I want you to tell me about your program at the Siuslaw Public Library on August 30th at 12 noon.
Well, on Thursday, August 30th, I have been invited to perform at your local library here in Florence, and I will be doing a 75-minute program of folk songs of the American labor movement, songs by Joe Hill and Earl Robinson and Woody Guthrie and Maurice Sugar, and I hope folks will come along and sing along and learn of the provenance of these songs and understand that before we had unions, we didn't have a middle class. And now that unions are starting to disappear, we're losing our middle class. So these songs are still important and still relevant. So come and sing.
Play us out. Play us a song while I let the folks know. You've been listening to KXCR Radio in Florence, Oregon at 90.7 on the dial. We've been listening to Adam Miller do his songs, his music, and if you want to hear more, arrive at the library on August 30th at 12 noon. Thank you, Adam. This has been a pleasure, a true pleasure.
This heirloom is 50 years old. Me and Mary were a little older. We came here in 1918. Now the factory's closing down. This loom came from another mill that was falling into a river. Me and Mary, we came here from Austria together. And on a hot summer night, you could hear these looms. They never shut them down. Weaving and spinning the silken dreams of the workers in Allentown.
Thank you for listening to The Grab Bag. This is KXCR Radio at 90.7 on your FM dial in Florence, Oregon.